Greetings all. Welcome to Aquarian Diary. I'm your host, John Irving. It is July 4th, 2024. First of all, happy 4th of July to all the Americans out there. I hope you have a fantastic weekend with your friends and loved ones. What I want to talk about here today may seem self-evident, but at the same time, it can be a bit confusing for people. And that is the relationship between the spiritual seeker and the collective. There's a very common notion around these days, this idea that humanity is ascending to a higher level of consciousness, which will have many implications and manifestations, including things like increased psychic and intuitive abilities. And I have no doubt that that is actually occurring. We can think of it as kind of like the baseline or the lowest common denominator being raised for the collective. So everyone kind of gets a bit of a boost by default as the energies on the planet get raised. However, that does not mean that we're suddenly going to have billions of people who are enlightened. Far from it. Enlightenment is actually a very rare phenomenon, despite what a lot of people think. In my many decades of being involved in spiritual activities and spiritual practice, I have only met a few enlightened people, and I mean a few. So let's just accept that. Just because one has psychic abilities, or can speak with their guides, or practice divination, or whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean that they're enlightened, and it doesn't necessarily even mean that they are more spiritually advanced than the baseline. Although that is often the case, it is not always true. Some people have psychic gifts, just as other people have musical gifts, or they're gifted in mathematics, or whatever the case may be. Psychic phenomenon in and of themselves are not actually something that is foreign to most people's capabilities. But I digress. The main point I want to discuss here is the relationship between a spiritual seeker and the collective. A spiritual seeker is someone who consciously and deliberately makes the pursuit of spiritual advancement a priority and focus of their lives. And I would argue that there are far fewer serious spiritual seekers than most people think. There are many people who dabble in spirituality, but don't necessarily make it one of their top priorities. And that has always been true. If we look at society as a whole, there was only a very small segment of society that made such pursuits a very important part of their life. That has always been true, and it's true now, and it will be true in the future as well. The collective is an amalgam of all of the consciousness that exists here on Earth, in its various forms and in its various states of evolution. To some extent, we mingle with those energies simply as a function of existing here on this planet, which is one of the reasons Earth is so hard. Because everyone here has free will, they get to choose at what level they want to be at in terms of their consciousness. So there's people here at a very low level of consciousness, and there's people at higher levels of consciousness, and many in between. So a spiritual seeker, over time, will learn that this is simply a fact. And they will have to begin to discriminate about who and what they expose themselves to, insofar as that's possible. If you're at all empathic or psychically sensitive, you will already know that being around people who are in a low consciousness state can undermine your own state of energy or consciousness. Thus, we have to do things like energy clearing and protection in certain cases in order to preserve our holistic wellness. Again, this is simply a fact. Now, those who are beginning to explore spirituality may take quite a bit of time to realize this and may ultimately have to purge certain people and situations from their experience as much as possible in order to maintain a higher state of consciousness or awareness. We are somewhat energetically porous to our environment, to our experience, to what we perceive, to what we witness, and so on. And let's face it, reality as we understand it or experience it here on Earth is a cacophony of all of these different states of consciousness, and it's kind of like a pyramid where the majority is at the bottom or in the middle, and there are fewer at the top. Yes, unfortunately, that's just the way things are, and that's the way things have always been, and that's the way things always will be. The pyramid might get taller, but it'll always be like that. Perhaps in some very distant future, humanity will all be resonating in a very high state of consciousness, but even in the spiritual realms, there are varying degrees of consciousness or power. In fact, in the collective here, we can encounter things like psychic vampires, ill-intentioned people who are deeply wounded and traumatized, who haven't healed from those things, who then project that into their environment. We can have people who breach other people's privacy or free will, or invade their space psychically without permission, and even attempt to interfere with or alter their destiny or life path without their explicitly informed, conscious consent. This amounts to an expression of will that causes harm to others, whether we realize it or not. We have no right to interfere with or alter someone else's destiny against their free will. Others obsess over things like gossip or forms of voyeurism. All sorts of things like this can occur and do occur at lower levels of consciousness. According to legends, it is these kinds of abuses of power that led to the downfall of Atlantis. Let's not repeat that. This is a little different from the expression of creativity, which we were all given the gift to engage in. Creativity does not necessarily impose on others' free will. I'll add that I think people should be very careful about who they're intimate with, because we form very strong bonds and connections with people that we share physical intimacy with, and that can have fairly significant implications for us. So that's another thing we should be fairly discriminating about. I'm not against intimacy. It's just, again, about using our discernment. But back to my main point, as I have spoken about in previous episodes, like the one I published recently called Don't Look Down, the more advanced spiritual seeker needs to be very discriminating about their energy and their environment, and it may take numerous lifetimes for them to learn that this is simply just a fact. Because many of us can be very compassionate and even a bit naive, this can be a hard lesson. I share this with you because if you're someone who needs time alone, who to some extent needs to isolate and protect their energy, or to be very selective socially about who you expose yourself to, your friends, your work, whatever the case may be, you should not necessarily judge yourself for that or condemn yourself for that. It may, in fact, be the best thing for you. And like I said before, the truth is that there are simply not that many people who are really advanced spiritual seekers. It has been traditionally the case for thousands of years that many advanced seekers actually went into fairly isolated circumstances for quite some time at the later stages of their spiritual evolution. The most important goal was actually to achieve a state of enlightenment. Often this involved lifetimes of relative isolation before they could attain that. So yeah, if you're that kind of person, don't beat yourself up about it. Take care of yourself, respect your energy, maintain your energy field, because you want to stay in a higher state of consciousness as much as possible for as long as possible. Thus, you do not necessarily want to expose yourself to people or situations that literally drain your energy and lower your consciousness. Clearly, not everyone shares this ambition, but some of us do. For more detail, check the episode description for other episodes or articles that are related or that I mentioned. And if you're interested in a reading with me, I'll put a link to that as well. I have a 15% off special on currently. Many sincere thanks to everyone who supports me, especially my YouTube members. Thank you very much. Take care, all the best, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.